That was a while.
And I still don't know when we've done.
Well, I wasn't gonna say that, but I'm glad you're aware of it.
You'll be aware of it the next contract I buy.
It's like the A&M professor said, I taught you everything I know and you're still stupid.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So back then.
Now we got the Zoom camera, Donna, right behind you, so don't get in the way of the Zoom camera. Now get down low, you're good.
System.
What is that right there? What is that?
So you sent me,
This tank. Okay, I didn't realize we were gonna have that on Zoom. Okay, good.
did you want it on Zoom? Or-
I don't care. I'll see what Austin, if he wants to use it this year.
Okay,
He won't be here till about 1:30 though. He's close.
alright. Just use the clicker and go back and forth.
What does that do?
Maybe.
Like your optimism.
I like it. That is really fun.
Here we go.
How do you do on it? See, what do you do?
Forward and backwards.
It's no one day-to-day, so that-
Already broke it.
You know what?
Because it was working. Just a minute ago. That's the real test.
There you go.
Okay. You're so good.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, ma'am.
You're gonna be,
And so zoom up and they can hear me.
yep, they can hear and then you can see everybody.
Is there a way to share the screen so that I can view them?
Yep.
Perfect. How many people so far? Did you tell us?
4.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Leaving already, huh?
Yeah, already.
Well, I don't blame you. I've heard about that Bob guy.
Uh-huh. Go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
It's still fluttering. Sometimes how long are you doing? It's permanent now. I have to go back. Hey, water. It's him for over. You need some, you know, over and then like that. I'm like,
Yes.
I'm going to I won and I thought I'd come back and work for a while. So you're. We just started. But another thing that I'm part of it. Something that you just do, whatever you know, you should come back. And so I figured you on there. That's nice. Yeah, and then I'll, so I get my. Yeah, so. Do is and now, I'll just, And.
Oh, yeah. 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 They can make you for a while.
Putting up sign. Timber.
There is, you go north or south.
Yeah, I got about 70 miles per hour. The surrounding. It's
1385.
here.
1385.
Do you have any listings? How much is it? Today's dial. I need something for 50. And when what's the any or sign or now you want to take out
But I just remember how quiet.
Yeah. It's all right.
So if you want to know what silence is. These are things like that.
Yeah. Right.
Great feet. These chairs.
Oh, my.
He didn't say that.
Anyway, it. Okay. How are you?
He's got it down.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm letting him get his eyes out. No, it's, you know.
Adam, how are you doing?
Yeah, how are you?
Yes.
So, like, when my pay.
Yes.
Did you figure it out?
Yeah.
Everybody have the materials in back?
All right, class is starting.
They're supposed to do with riffraff. Oh,
I'm telling you, we rip around here for good at rip around.
riffraff is anybody not in the class. How that is. Now, we will have Austin Knight, who's the head of Trust Title, the title company just right across the parking lot from us. He'll be in that big file you got, actually doing all that, and it's gonna talk about that and some other title thing, but he is in the midst of a closing, one of our agents, so it'll probably be 1:30, which will give us some time to talk about some things that we need to talk about. There's some things we need to discuss. Are you listening?
Yes, sir.
Zoomers, can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. Good. Question?
Nope, just counting how many are.
How many?
Five.
Okay, good. Okay. Things that we need to talk about are things that keep coming to my attention. And why does something come to my attention? It's an issue, yeah.
Ford has Coca-Cola.
Yeah, it's Coca-Cola, it's a popcorn. It's good, yeah. The concept is that I want you to come to me sooner rather than later. But I want you to take advantage of the other resources. All right, it's a hotline, I want you to contact them. Talk to people like your coach, like Jana and Joe and Marcia, McCoy, and then ultimately me. Because we have materials in the back, sir. Thank you. Right there, so thank you. You don't want to have to get up and get down, especially when you're hobbling a little bit there.
I just kind of flail around a little bit.
There you go. And the things that come to my attention are things that you probably should have called me last week or the week before, or should have called the coach or the hotline or whatever. And maybe you didn't because you felt like it was going to work out or you think through it. And remember, when we talk about all this transaction stuff, contract stuff, all those types of things, we talk about them from a concept standpoint. We don't memorize the contracts. That'll never end because they're going to keep changing. We changed them 3 times when I was on the work alert committee during that 6-year period. And it's going to continue to change. And the contracts will continue to change because why? Why do they keep changing? Problem. Well, but sometimes a problem gets the attention of the Broker Laureate Committee, the legislature, the commissioners.
Changes.
Pardon me?
Changes in general.
Yeah, it changes change in general always have a source. They always have a thing. And for example, Texas Realtor hears from its members. Its members say, hey, we need to fix this. I know they thought they knew what they were writing, but nobody else understands it. So all those things cause change, and that will always happen. You have changes in the law, you have changes in the rules of track, you have changes in the industry. The big change that we had in the 1-4 family contract that actually became mandatory in 2023, where we made the change in the contract for the option fee to go to the title company. That happened as a result of really 2 things. One, complaints from us, from realtors. He said, I am getting tired of trying to find the stupid listing agent. It's on the weekend, it's whatever, and I can't find them and get them the option fee, and it's the third or whatever. And so we were complaining, said, we need to have a better place to do that. We need to have a better source of that. And so Broker Laureate Committee said, okay, fine, let's make the change. And we made the change in conjunction with, in concert with the title companies who said, yeah, we'll take that. We'll take the earnest money, which we'd already been taken. They'd already been taken, and we'll take the option fee. So things that were happening in industry, things that realtor said, just like when realtor said, you know, I hate on the last day of the option periods at 10 o'clock at night and we're still negotiating the deal. Then we need to have an earlier end to the option period. And that's how we ended up with the 5 p.m., which I think is too early. It should have been like 7 p.m. To give people time to get home from work or something like that. Right. So those are the kinds of things that happen that causes the contracts change. And we'll always have changes in the legislature. One of the big changes we had dealing with PIDs and the PID addendum that came from the legislature last year. So we're having those types of things all the time. And will always. So what will not happen, what will not really change, except there'll be some nuances within it, will be occasionally nuances changing the concept. The concepts are what the concepts are. Buyer's gonna pay earnest money, buyer's gonna pay option fee if that's what you agree to. You got certain concepts. How that happens, the details of it may change based on what the industry is doing. So we don't worry about memorizing, because if you spend your time memorizing the contract, you say, well, yeah, I know paragraph 23. That's where the option period is. Well, not anymore. The option period still exists, but it's not in paragraph 23, is it? No, it was moved to paragraph 5. So it's really no point in memorizing the contract, just understand the concepts of it. As we kind of work through it. And we'll continue to have to be able to do that. You'll stay with the concepts of it, and you'll be ahead of the game. And you'll find a way, if you understand the concepts, when your client, buyer or seller, has a need to do something in the contract, because you understand the concepts, you'll know how to address it. If you've got a seller, for example, says, okay, one of the things I want to see, we had problems on our last 2 deals with the appraisal. I want something in the contract that says the lender must do the appraisal by within 15 days after effective contract. I want that in the contract. No. What's the concept? Only parties to a contract can be made to do anything. Lender's not a party to the contract. You can't say to the lender, you better have that appraisal done within 15 days or this contract terminates. Can't do that and make them do it. And the lawyers would be real unhappy with the situation, because you're making someone not a part of the contract and you're affecting the rights of the parties in the contract based on the acts of a non-party. Can't do that. Now, what you could do, seller says, okay. I'm see you understand the concept. I'm pretty impressed by you. You understand the concept. You must have been in Bob's class. Okay, that's what I do. So what can we do? Says, well, what you can do is you can say to the buyer, you need to produce an appraisal from your lender within 15 days of the effective date of the contract, or I, the seller, have a right to terminate the contract and keep the earnest money. You can say something like that. You can say that because you're talking about a party. Now, you still have a little bit of a challenge with some small segment of attorneys that say you're creating a situation where the buyer is relying on a non-party of the contract to perform, to do something. Say, well, they do that all the time anyway. You know, we rely on their lender to get their financing approval. We rely on their lender to do things in paragraph 2A of third-party financing. And so already doing that, this is just another step. Just like we ask for proof of funds. Who are you going to get proof of funds from? Not the buyer, you get it from the lender. But what you're going to say is, buyer must produce proof of funds acceptable to the seller within so many days after effective contract. You're requiring this of a party to the contract. You're not requiring it of a non-party. And so understanding that concept will help you when your client wants to accomplish certain things, saying, here's how we do that. Here's how we can do it. Being careful not to step over the line and practice law and say, okay, here's the language for that, because we don't have that. Unless it's a business detail or a factual statement, and then under the instruction of our client, we can do that in paragraph 11. So understanding those concepts is really important. We are dealing with the concept of understanding what's in the contracts in a seller's disclosure notice. Because, for example, seller's disclosure notice, we have several versions in our area. We've got at least 3 versions of the seller's disclosure notice in our area. We've got the Texas Broker one, we've got the Metro Tex one, we've got the Craig. Some brokers have their own. For example, you may have a buyer on an EBI listing, and they've got their own seller's disclosure. You need to know the difference between the different seller's disclosure. So if you've got a seller and you have the listing and you say to the seller, So it says, yeah, I've heard I've got to fill out some kind of disclosure note, something, so. Where do I get that? What do I use? Well, our policy is to use the Texas Realtor self-disclosure notes. That's one, you may have a very smart, astute seller who says, okay, but are there other ones that I could use that I still would comply with the law? Now, there's a 4-page TREC one. That's all that's in the property code, 65.008. That's all you have to do. You could do that. But that's not our policy. We prefer you use this one. And smart seller says, okay, tell me the difference. You need to understand the concept of the difference. What's the difference between the TREC one and the Texas Realtor one, or the Metro Texas one, which not a fan of? What's the difference? You need to know the difference. So when you're saying to a buyer, to a seller, here's one you ought to use, and here's why. Here's what a buyer would want to know. Here's something you'd want to disclose. When you disclose more than a minimum required by law, that's to your benefit as a seller. And so that's why. And so there's some things in the longer form, 6-page Texas Realtor form, it's not in the TREC form, because it's not in the property code. It's not required by law. And so, for example, a question about inspections. Inspections about death on property. None of those are in the TREC form. Those are in the Texas Realtor form. You say, here's why it's good for you to be aware of that, and good for you to disclose and to deal with those types of situations. But you've got to understand the difference. You have to understand that there are different concepts in the different disclosure notices. If somehow you end up in a transaction and the older contract form is being used, you need to understand the difference between the older form that's being used and the current form that should be used. So that when you say to your client says, okay, let's look at the transaction and see how the changes in the contract form are impacted by your transaction. Because it may not be, but you would have to know the difference between the two forms to know whether or not it affected your specific transaction. So you need to understand the concept of that. Because if you go back to your client, and if your client is using the wrong form, the old form, and something in the change in the contract form affects them, and they file a complaint with TREC, you're in trouble. TREC says you're negligent because you didn't use, and you are required to use the current most appropriate contract form for your client. And so, but you'd have to, because you let that go, you didn't talk to them about the differences. They went ahead and used a contract form that impacted on their transaction. So you need to understand those concepts. Now, there's a concept in a transaction that we've run into some challenges with lately. We're back into the multiple offer world. You might even have to consider doing another multiple offer class. And there's a process to go from, I understand how you can be allergic to multiple. There's a challenge in a multiple offer situation of how you go through the process and negotiate with these multiple buyers. And there's a tendency, and I understand it, I don't agree with it, but I understand why you're doing it, to try to shortcut things and maybe email back and forth and kind of have conversations back and forth, maybe text, maybe on the phone back and forth, because we need to kind of get this thing down to a point where we think it can be reduced to a contract and everything will be good. Well, the problem is when you do that is people misunderstand what you're doing. So you've got the seller and you get an offer from a buyer, and actually you got 4 offers. And one of them seller likes better than the others. And so your seller counters on that offer. Now, how he counters is very important, if in fact he counters. And my philosophy is in a multiple offer situation, the seller shouldn't counter. You've got in your packet there a form, seller's invitation to buyers to make new offer. It's a great form. Texas Realtor 1926. What the seller does with this form is it says to the buyer, and he can send this out to every buyer who's interested in the property, who has shown the property or anything, and he can send something different to each buyer. And he says, thank you for the interest in the property tonight. Says, if you would change these things, he's got a big paragraph where he lists out all these things. Everybody have that seller's invitation? Keep going all the way past that first packet of these other forms. Go past the contract and past that.
Second, to last page.
The next one. And this is.
So, the seller, by using this, says if you do these things, it doesn't say I would accept your offer. It says I would more favorably, important language, take real thing about terms and seller may more favorably consider. Doesn't mean if you make these changes that I'm going to accept your offer and we'll have a contract. I would more favorably, I'll give it some thought. What you sent me so far, I'm not happy with. But if you do these things, I can be a little happier. And we might end up with something. It says on this form, number 3, this is not a counter offer. So this is not a counter offer that can be accepted by the buyer and become a contract. This is a great form. It lets the seller say to the buyer, hey, thanks for the offer. Glad you're interested in my property. Let's move forward. Let's see what we can come up with. And here's some things I'd like for you to address. If you'll address these things, I'm more favorable to consider, and maybe we'll end up with something. This keeps your seller in control. It doesn't create a situation like in the example that I just talked about, where the seller countered. Now, he didn't counter on the written contract form. He countered by email. And that's not good. Because when you counter by email, if the buyer says, oh, okay, so if I do all those things, we got a contract. And that's exactly what they thought. And so when the seller sent these things over, the buyer said, okay, yeah, we'll make those changes. And they made the changes, initial signed, and sent it over. And the buyer's agent dated it, implying, oh, we've got a contract. Well, you didn't have a contract. You're still in the offering stage. Move back and forth with that. Process of how that was done was wrong. Because it led the other side to believe, if you do this, we've got a contract. And you can't do that. We literally have been in lawsuits to address this. And I understand my bias because I have to deal with those where I tend to be a little more conservative in how we go through that process. But I think ultimately you benefit from the mistakes that other agents have made in letting that happen. By using this form, you do it because what happened in this transaction is when the seller countered and the buyer was essentially the buyer's agent said, yeah, it's good. Yeah, my seller's going to do this. I need to get with him. He's real busy. It's working hard. La, 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 la. And 3 days later, you still don't have anything from the buyer's agent where the buyer signed off on everything. And the seller has another offer. He says, I like that one just about as well as this one. So he says, I think we're going to work that. And so all that was sent out was an email to the buyer's agent saying, sellers are going to move on and work another offer.
It's a withdrawal.
That's not the same as withdrawing an offer. You have a form in here. Withdrawal of offer. I like it better than my form. I've got a form in our internet. This is from Texas Realtor. Notice the withdrawal of offer. Got date in there. It's got all the stuff that we want to have. And so if seller, if he's going to move on from that first offer to the next offer, he needs to, in writing, and an email is fine, send this form and send an email over saying, here, my seller has withdrawn their previous offer. And then whatever else you want to say, and my seller is receptive to entertaining if you want to go ahead and do something or whatever. But this is better because the seller shouldn't be countering that second offer until he's totally withdrawn that first offer. Otherwise, this first offer may all of a sudden send it over and say, oh yeah, we got a contract. We agreed to everything you've asked us to do. People jump on that just like, sweet on sugar, just all the time. Is that a good phrase? If I tried to clean it up a little bit. But I would encourage you. Now, here's my challenge. Not one, but 2 agents. I had a conversation with them about a similar situation. Neither one of them are brand new agents. They've been in the business 3 to 5 years or more. They both said, wow, yeah, that's not bad. Is that a new form? More than 10 years old. Not a new form. And he said, I'd never heard of it. I had no idea. And which meant it never been in my class. I've talked about it and I've pushed this form. I think it's a good form. You should work through it. So I would encourage you to understand the concept of this form and the concept of the withdrawal of offer form as you work through it. So you're gonna make a copy or something?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So it's I don't know how to fix it. And I understand everybody's busy and doing deals and working through processes and all those things. But one of our real pluses here are the resources we provide. But in order for the resources we provide to have any value, you have to access them. All of our classes, we've got on our YouTube channel, we record them, watch them whenever. So you've got access to them as you work through them. I would encourage you to go through the process and be able to do that. Do those concepts make a little bit of sense to you? Is that a yes, Bob?
Yes.
What do you pull from the concept, from the contract, or from the conversation in the chat? What do you pull from that? What do you see my important points are? Do I need to repeat it?
Okay.
James, and then Joe.
If you're selling, client, selling in a multiple offer situation, don't, commit them to a counter offer. Use the invitation to submit a new offer to provide your seller as many alternatives and options as possible.
Yeah, if you've got a great offer, your seller are just going to accept it. Now, as much as I love this form, there's a little bit of a downside. The intent of the form is to encourage this buyer to work with the seller and make those changes. Is something coming?
Kalen's printing them off now.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So that's the concept of it. A lot of agents are not familiar with this form. And the agent representing the buyer may not understand it, may not know what the seller's doing, and you may lose this buyer. There's the risk. There's always, seller needs to understand if they do anything other than full acceptance of a buyer's offer, they could lose that buyer. They may never hear from that buyer again. Now, in and of itself, that's not a reason to accept an offer that's otherwise unacceptable. It has things that like to change. The seller needs to know that risk. Just like when the seller counters to a buyer's offer, they may need to understand that they may never hear from that buyer again. It's not a reason to accept a buyer's offer, but they need to understand either way, it works in both directions. So you do that. Joe, you had something?
Oh, my take is that you need to be familiar with the concept to be able to explain it to your client, either seller or buyer,
Yeah,
which is something that sometimes we struggle with.
we do struggle with it because here's the challenge. It requires you to do some additional work. You need to be familiar with the different sales disclosure notices, not just the one that we use, one that they may want to use. You need to be familiar with the contract one. Now, fortunately, there are not a lot of big changes from the 20-16 contract form to the 20-17. There are some important changes. It depends on the nature of the transaction itself, whether one would be to the advantage or disadvantage of your client. But you need to know the differences. If you don't know the differences, you can't have a reasonable conversation with your client about here are your choices. Because when you're talking to your clients, you always want to give them information so they can make a good decision. They can make an informed decision as you go through the process. And they can make a risk-based decision as you work through the process. When you look at the differences between the 6-page Texas Realtor Sales Disclosure Notice and the 4-page track one, we do feel like it's to the advantage of the seller to do more than a minimum required by law. But it may well be that the nature of the transaction, the nature of the seller, the nature of the property is such that the additional things in the Texas Realtors form really don't matter. It's just not a big deal. There was not a death on the property in recent times. I mean, things of that nature. They bought it new 10 years ago. There's no inspection, nothing, so there are things that are in the technical report that are just, it doesn't matter if you're not in the track form. Yes, sir.
The office policy require your approval of using something other than.
Yeah, so the question is the office policy, which is to use the technical form, if they're going to use something different, that should be a phone call. That should be a phone call at least to the agent hotline, or to Marcia or to myself. There are circumstances in which they may have a good reason. We'll always respect advice of counsel. If it's a situation where the seller says, well, my attorney has advised me to use the short track form. And here's why my attorney advised me that. Well, we'll respect that. Now, we'll have to decide if this is a pink flag or the first red flag, and we need to kind of keep an eye on this seller. Maybe there's some other things going on because they already have advice of counsel as you're moving forward. And they've already changed a couple of paragraphs in the listing agreement. So we need to kind of watch that. But if you're going to do something different, there needs to be a reason for it. Because the reason we have for virtually all of our policies is based in something, based in our experience, based in risk-based decisions. We don't have any arbitrary decisions. All of our policies are frankly well vetted. And so if they're saying, well, I want to do this, just like when you're authorized, when you're listing a property, you're authorized, if your seller changes things in there, you've got to make a call. If they don't make any changes and it just goes right with everything is in the text, you're authorized to sign off on that. But if they start making changes in paragraphs and lining through things, writing their thing, then you got to make a phone call to at least the hotline, and if not me. And because what's ironic, sometimes the changes they make, we don't care. Doesn't matter at all. In fact, it's to their disadvantage that they've changed something. If they are determined to do it, fine, that's okay, we're good. But if it's something in there, I mean, the indemnity clause, for example, we never accept a listing without that. That's got to be, they've got to indemnify us, because what that clause says is that if they make a mistake and they misrepresent something, we're responsible. No, we won't take that listing. We're not willing to be responsible for mistakes and problems that a seller created. So there's some things in there that we simply say, accept that. You work good, but we have a basis for it, have a good reason going through that thing. And so we've got a policy. Here's why. You always need to be able to say, here's the concept behind it. Here's why we prefer you use this. And if they're determined. Now, what you sometimes find is a seller is wanting to use a different form, like a shorter form. He said, well, technically, I don't really have to do a seller disclosure notice because I've never seen the property. Never having seen the property doesn't get you on the list of 11. 11 sellers who are exempt from, filling out a seller disclosure notice. Never having seen it, never having lived in the property, being clueless about the property does not get you on the list. You still have to complete. You still have to tell us what you know and what you don't know. If you've got a buyer, and a buyer, for example, is to make a decision. If you've got a seller, buyer is using that property, and the seller said, no, I'm not going to do seller disclosure. Or I'm just going to line through every paragraph and I'll sign at the end. Buyer has decided if they're willing to accept it or not. The buyer says, you know what, we're going to do inspections till the cows came in. I don't care what the seller thinks they know or don't know. We still want the property. We're willing to live with the fact that they do it. And the buyer may really be smart. He said, plus I know if anything happens, seller just picked up extra liability for not doing this. And we've got extra leverage in coming after the seller later for something you failed to disclose. And so it's kind of one of those things that we're able to talk to the buyer and say, okay, it's your decision. It's not an automatic. If the seller doesn't do it, if the seller tries it in the contract check off 7B3 said this seller is not required to give notice, buyer is the one who gets to make the decision. How you doing? You say, well, if you don't do this, then this can't be the contract. We're not, no, it's your buyer decision. You explain to your buyer, here's the deal. Here's how it impacts on you. Here's the circumstance. And then, your buyer gets to make the decision. It's like when you have a transaction and the seller disclosure notice is not signed off by the buyer. What's our policy? Do we require in every transaction that a buyer sign the seller disclosure notice? Sure. Does the law require it? No. No. Law does not require the buyer to acknowledge or to sign a seller disclosure notice. What we look at is what's in the contract. And if 7B1 is in the contract, which says that the seller has provided, the buyer has the notice, we don't care whether they sign it or not. We've got proof in the contract that they received it. So it depends on what else is going on. You may, unless you at the beginning, when you first establish a relationship with the buyer's agent, with the buyer, you may say, okay, here's some of our policies, here's some things we require. And one of them is that, when you get seller disclosure notice, you need to sign it because that's something that goes into our file. You don't ever say, you've got to complete that because compliance won't let me get a commission if I don't get all this paperwork right. See, they don't care about that. And that's not something that you address or deal with. If we understand all those concepts, we can provide the information to our clients so they can make decisions. But that requires you to have done the extra work, understand the reasons for the seller's disclosure notice, understand the exemptions, the exclusions for that, the 11 exclusions, who fits on that, who doesn't fit on that, who gets to check off 7B3, who doesn't, and what the rights are as you work through that. Understanding those concepts will put you so far ahead of the game, especially talking to your client, because they'll see that you know things. You don't have to memorize what's in paragraph 7B or what's in paragraph 7H. You don't have to memorize all that, but they'll know that you understand the context as you work through the process. Does that make kind of semi-sense? You work through it.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So legally, the seller doesn't have to provide seller disclosure form,
The seller doing what?
doesn't have to provide seller disclosure.
Okay, so did I say something in the transaction that the buyer doesn't have to sign it?
For buyer doesn't have to sign.
The seller, under the Texas Property Code, section 5.008, is required for the sale, and it's very specific, of a single residential property. If it's a duplex, property code doesn't require it. If a seller is selling an entire duplex, or triplex, or fourplex, he's selling the entire property to a buyer. The property code does not require a seller disclosure notice. Now, we require it. So you're going to do one anyway. We're not going to represent you because it's to the seller's disadvantage if he doesn't do that. But the property code says, and it's in the law, that's a statute, it's in the law, and there are consequences. So that unless you fit one of these 11, and the big consequence is if you don't do this, it gives buyer's rights of termination all the way up to closing. So the seller is legally required under the statute. Now, all requirements, except for those that involve criminal acts, all requirements are civil matters. If the seller is required to do this, and he doesn't do it, that's a civil matter. And the buyer's going to have to decide to take some action. Or to it. But if you represent the seller, he's got to understand the huge extra liability he takes if he doesn't comply. And it's significant. Because as I pointed out many times, what is the most common lawsuit in real estate? Well, that's a source of it, but it's the buyer suing the seller after closing. The seller failing to disclose, or misrepresenting something. That's the most common lawsuit in real estate. Bigger than 2 and 3 combined. And so anytime the seller does anything to not make sure the buyer has a proper due diligence, anytime they don't do anything that makes sure that they disclose and don't misrepresent something, then that's extra liability as we work through there. Do we have more paperwork coming?
You just print it off.
No, it was a lot of documents. But I want to talk a little bit more to this. In your little package here, same thing where you've got the seller's invitation, this menu offer, and you've got 2 other forms in there. One is an amendment form, and the other is notice of buyer's termination. They're front and back, so they might be on the same page front and back. I don't know how that ended up. Everybody see those? The direct promulgated amendment form and the notice of buyer's termination contract. We seem to go through cycles on this. Everybody find it? Everybody have that? It's right at the very end. It's right there next to the page to submit. And one of the cycles we've gone through, I've had this both here and in the Rockwall office, is it's the very last day of the option period. And you've got the seller. And maybe you're negotiating repairs or haven't been able to negotiate repairs. You're still trying to work through that. But you get something from the buyer's agent, in which at the same time, in the same email, you have the direct promulgated amendment form and a termination of contract form. Now, the logic of a buyer's agent, and they're wrong, but the logic, well, we didn't want to put our buyers' earnest money at risk, so in case because the amendment is going to always be a repair amendment. So if you couldn't negotiate, if we can't agree to these repairs, we didn't want to put our buyers' earnest money at risk, so we're terminating the contract if we can't get this done. Well, I've seen both of them over. Which one do you think prevails?
Amendment.
No, it's termination.
Terminations.
When you look at the amendment form, there's important language at the very top of the form. Amendment to contract concerning the property at and the address. A contract that is closed cannot be amended. Contract that is terminated cannot be amended. When they sent the termination over, it terminated the contract. Now, we've had in all three of our situations, we had to go through attorneys and the parties had to decide what do they want to do. In one case, they wanted to rescind the termination. And there's a process that not all attorneys agree is sufficient, but parties can decide to use it. Many other attorneys say, well, the cleanest, best way to do that, whole new contract. To do a whole new contract part, because that was terminated, it's gone. So we got to do a whole new one. I mean, I don't go through the, because there's a risk, by the way, of doing the whole new one. Because when you start filling in all the blanks, maybe you miss something. Change a number or whatever, and you've got mistakes. So there's a risk there. But the parties can decide they're willing to do it and go through that process. But the key is that contract terminated. Yeah. You know, when the buyer's agent sent this over, most of the time, what they say is, well, that really wasn't our intention. It was just a protective move. We're just trying to protect our buyer's earnest money. Well, good news. You have it. They're going to get it back. And you don't get the house. So that's how that works. The complication, one of the three, this is one in Rockwall, the complication is when they sent the notice termination contract along with the amendment, it was a repair amendment. Seller was in a backup contract.
Oh.
What just happened?
They do the backup.
Backup contract just moving to the first position. So we had to let the buyer's agent know, you know what, here's what's happened with our seller. Get into a backup contract, they're in the first position now. And our seller has told us that if your buyer would like to move into a backup contract, if they'd like to make an offer, it'd be on a backup basis, the seller would entertain it. That means he's going to accept it. But right now, you're gone, you're out of here. And that's what'll happen, because that's in that backup contract addendum, that's the language in there first, moving to the first position as you work through that. But that keeps happening. And so as you work through the process, you've got to make sure you understand the concept of it. James?
Well, how do those circumstances ever go after their agents? Do they realize?
It's a good question. Does the buyer go after their buyer says, well, you didn't tell me I was going to lose the deal. You told me that this is the way we're going to protect the earnest money and we're going to get things worked out and we're just negotiating with the seller to repair. That's what you told me. Now you're telling me the contract's gone and I've lost the house. I got no way of getting this. And in fact, he's already in a contract with somebody else. Depending on the relationship between the buyer and the buyer's agent, they may go after that buyer. As they work through it. Now, it's going to be a challenge proving up damages and all those kinds of things as work through it. And it comes down to that thing that we talk about a lot. Tommy's a good example of it. Depends on how much the buyer likes the buyer's agent. How likable they are. If it's Tommy who's very likable, they're not gonna sue Tommy. They haven't yet, so that's good.
I'll bring a passport.
Yes, you will. There you go. But I don't know any fact, until something gets to appellate level, we don't have any information on it. But I can certainly see, depending on the relationship between the buyer and buyer's agent and how big a deal this was for the buyer to lose and what they thought their agent told them, here's what we're really doing here. We're not really terminating the contract, which is just kind of a backup. It's just kind of what we're really doing is going to negotiate repairs. That's what we're really doing. Buyer who's been around Park Club says, well, that's not what it says. It says I've terminated the contract. And I noticed there's not any place on here for sellers. Just me, the buyer. Joe?
Quick question, Don and I are wondering, what number did the buyer check off on the termination of contract? Because none of them apply to.
Number one. In every case, they were in the option period. In every case, they're in the last day of the option period. Still thinking they were still trying to negotiate repairs. Because they also had that misbelief of how contracts work and said, we got to do this before the option period ends because we can't negotiate repairs after the option period. Oh, that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. You understand the concept of that, but they were pushing it. In all three cases, they were still in the option period, so they checked number one off. That's how they terminated. And when you check number one off, if you've done it properly, if you're still in the option period, that absolute slam dunk terminates that contract. That's gone. You know, I should. But that's the concept. It's really important. And it's one of those things that there are consequences as you have actions as you work through those types of things. Kind of deal with it. Questions on that? We good so far? We got the concepts of what we're talking about here so far? We good? No, you've been way too quiet. Adam's sitting there going, I got questions, but I didn't want to get in the way because I know everybody else has a question. Does everybody know Adam? Does everybody met Adam? Stand up for a second. This is Adam. He's director of marketing and productivity coach. Some of you may have already started working with him. And one of the things that I want you to understand about coaching, because in Trek's last meeting in May, I went ahead and finally approved the language that Broker Responsibility Working Group had sent forward. That anytime an agent does something new, type transaction for the first 3 times, you're going to have coaching and assistance. So coaching doesn't just apply to brand new agents. It applies to other agents. Tommy?
I have one more to go, and I'm out.
Well, we do have a higher number.
Okay,
Brokers have the ability, but that's the minimum established by Trek.
but yours is 4.
And you get to, and here's the thing, you get to make decisions. And Trek even allows a broker some latitude. It says, the broker can say, you know what? Very experienced agent, this is the type of transaction that you're doing, and they've done 2 of them, and we're very comfortable, so we don't need. Hello, Officer Knight. I have been tap dancing and working through this and coming up with, really good things, knowing that you were going to be, did the closing go well?
Closing went well.
Sorry, I'm late, traffic was terrible getting over there.
I bet it was. So we're in team right across the parking lot.
Yeah.
And Terry, are we doing chairs up here? Yeah. And so, you've got the paperwork and we've got it up here.
Oh, good.
We're gonna do that where we can. Back and forth here. We use the.
Absolutely.
Work through that.
So this is obviously what you get from us whenever you open a file. All right, so this is our tax certificate. What you see right here is we're looking at 2022 values. We have the base tax that we use, right? Your total taxes obviously showing nothing currently outstanding. So this is what we use when we're going through and we're sitting down with a client. I'm going to go through this with them in detail and I'll show you guys exactly how to do that. Okay, so there's first page. I'll go to page 2 up here at the top. You have your 2022 values. Okay,
So you have an appraised value there of 349,240. You see a 10% cap, that's your homestead cap, okay? And then you have your actual assessed value there for 299,06. So if you look here, it shows that there's currently a homestead exemption and there's an over 65 exemption. All right, below that, it also notifies us there's a homestead cap, which tells me that we're capped. So that they've had the property for multiple years with the homestead exemption. So the property taxes could only go up 10% because of that homestead cap, which gives you the difference between the assessed value and the appraised value. Because there's a homestead cap on there, they're actually being taxed on this assessed value of 290. Okay. It'll also show if there's an over 65 cap, it'll be down here, say over 65 cap, which could increase the percentage of that cap, lowering their taxable assessed value as well.
The taxable assessed value is the key.
Yes,
That's what the tax rate would be applied against.
absolutely. You hear people all the time that talk about the fact that your taxes can only go up 10%, but they don't understand how that really works, and that's it. So once you put that homestead exemption on the property, your taxes can only go up 10% from that January 1 of the year that you put it on. Okay, so what you see, it doesn't necessarily change the appraised value of the property, but it changes the assessed value of the property. Okay. Another thing I want you guys to look at here is we show the 2023 proposed.
You've all got this in your
Yeah.
packet there, okay?
So if you bring up, follow me right now, and we have proposed taxes for 2023, which taxes do you think I'm going to use in the proration agreement?
Assess.
I got to go off the assessed for 2022, all right? Proposed means that it can still change, right? So I'm always going to default to the 2022 values because that's what we have that's certified from the prior year. Now, if you come to me and you say, we really want to go off the 2023 proposed value, then I'll say, that's fine. I'll do whatever you want to do. As long as I have a unilateral agreement between buyer and seller, that they're okay to use that proposed value, then I'll use proposed value. I'll do whatever you guys want to do. As long as you tell me up front that we have an agreement between both parties. Okay. However, I'm going to default to 2022. Yes, sir.
Okay, I 65 exemption
Over 65.
and seller sells and it's moving to another property. The timing of moving that exemption to the other property, is it important to the taxes that are gonna be, if they move it immediately or if they move it 4 months from that? Can that change?
Yes, it's very important. So whenever you purchase a house and you go in to do your homestead exemption, there's an application that you fill out. I know for DCAD and for Colin CAD, you literally just go on their website. You type in your property information, it pulls it up. There's a link that says homestead application. You click on that, it's going to pull the document that's already pre-filled with all the information for the property. Okay, you go in, you fill that out, you give them a copy of your updated driver's license with the new address and a deed showing that you own the new property, right? And then they will transfer and put that homestead exemption on there for you. Same thing for your over 65. They can put that on there for you. The difference there is the homestead application, the over 65 application, I believe, has a date that says effective date. Okay, so that effective date needs to say the date of closing. If it doesn't, and they try to make it retroactive, then you're going to have rollback taxes that are going to hit that buyer.
Okay, say that again, please.
Sure. So the application for the homestead and over 65 has an effective date. If your sellers don't put the effective date of closing and they put a different date, then that county office can take that and they can take that exemption off and they'll be hit with retroactive taxes, rollback taxes.
Who will be hit, the seller or the buyer?
The buyer,
The buyer.
because the taxing office doesn't care where it comes from. They just want the money. Right? Yes, sir.
I heard, and I could be maybe completely misunderstood, but I heard a story of someone moving from West Texas, carrying their homestead exemption on the way things mixed. When they bought in a higher or higher values location, they were still able to have some sort of, assessment that traveled with them. I was wondering, were you familiar with such a
I've
concept?
never heard of that. I've never heard of
Only
that.
if you moved within Texas.
Now, I'm not saying that's not the case. I've just never heard that scenario. I will tell you in this particular scenario right here, does this got a pointer on it?
That's red.
There's a red button on there, it should.
Maybe. Oh, there it goes. It's not getting the TV though.
That work on it.
So I want to show you guys, it was a nice idea, right? I want to show you guys. So if you look at this assessed value right here, right? And then you see the proposed value. What's gonna happen is if Tommy, if you sell me that house, right? And the current taxes on it are assessed at 299.06. You fill out an application to transfer your homestead and you're over 65. That's gonna go to the new property with the effective date that you put on that application. The house here that I'm buying is now gonna be reassessed, right? At this total property value of 412,370. Okay, that cap falls off. For any over 65, any homestead exemption falls off, it gets reassessed at the current market value. All right, so then your client has to come in and they have to put on their homestead exemption and it'll take off the homestead exemption off of this new proposed amount. Okay,
And they put it on the new one?
well, yes, so when, if you buy it and you put the homestead exemption on, it's gonna come off of the full appraised value. Because what happens is when that homestead falls off and that over 65 gets transferred, they reassess that property at current market value.
Correct.
Right, so then your homestead is only gonna be applied towards the full appraised value for the new buyer. Good news is it only go up 10% from then on, but it's important for them to know. So that's another thing when somebody comes out to me and says, my taxes went up 15 grand, okay, I understand. But at the same time, the seller, they're responsible for the tax prorations up to the time that they own that house. And it's hard to go after seller and say, I need you to pay for the difference in taxes when those homestead exemptions come off. Because that levy wasn't against them. The government said you don't owe these taxes because of those exemptions. So it's not always easy as, hey, taxes went up $10, I need you to give me 5 of it. That makes sense. All right, let's move on a little bit further here. So next here on my tax certificate, on page 3, you have the taxing jurisdictions. You have the collector for those jurisdictions, so your client knows who to make their checks payable to. You have your millage rate or your tax rate. Right, and then this tells you the base amount of how they figure that tax that we had right here. Okay, that's the total of these items right here. Flip over here to page 4. If there was any HOA information, I'd have it right here too for your clients to be able to contact and say if you reach out to them. Thanks. Yes, sir.
So that's the homestead exemption thing for the over 65. My contract say at the end of the year, we'll come back if the taxes are different, we'll prorate. Never really thought about it being a change in the exemptions that were applied. So how does that typically develop? I guess it's a case by case basis. If I was over 65. And
This is my tax proration agreement that we signed at closing.
Now's your pointer.
Only if you're policy, nobody got. Leave it to Tommy. Leave it to Tommy. All right.
You want to be?
Exhibit A. Let's go back. All right.
3 or 4?
Slick here. Okay, so this is my proration agreement that I have at all closings, okay? It says the seller and buyer agree, they're part of a settlement transaction here. It says the ad valorem taxes, which is the property taxes, have been prorated between the two parties. Right here, we have personal property taxes are not prorated. I will hardly ever have any personal property taxes. That's typically like if we have like a mobile home that's not assessed real value. We hardly ever see that here, thank goodness. So this is typically always a no here. All right, so we're prorating the taxes. Taxes right now, up until October 1, are based on information from the prior year. Okay, after October 1, we'll base them on the current year if they get their taxes out on time. Most counties do, DCAT never does. All right. Skip on over here. So on this particular proration, if I was pulling this one out at closing, I also would have put down here that there was an over 65 exemption that may result in a change in the taxes. So I would check this here so they could see that and be aware of it. I just got out of a closing just now. It was brand new construction in Salina Hills up in Prosper. The tax certificate that I had said the taxes were $702,000. It was based on 50 acres, right? So on that particular proration, I had to put on here that this was based on agricultural open space. And there may be rollback taxes whenever they pull out for that agricultural exemption. My clients were like, whoa, and I'm like, good news is everybody on your street has the exact same issue right now and the builder is very aware of it. So Skip over here to the next page, and it says buyer and seller hereby agreed to instruct the selling agent to use the following dollar figures for the prorations. These are pulled right off of that first page of the tax certificate that I just showed you guys. Okay. We can also use one of these items here. If the buyer and seller agree to get together and say they don't want prorations or they want the prorations to be different, we can use this item here. Buyer will be fully responsible for the taxes. Seller's fully responsible for the taxes. They can figure all that out. As long as I have a unilateral agreement, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I just have to make sure that both sides agree to it. Because at this point, once you tell these forms, real estate agents out of it, title companies out of it. All right. So you guys have to come to an agreement on that. Paragraph 8 and 9, protect the buyer in the event that those taxes do come out and they are higher. For example, the one that I just talked about, where there's an exemption for agricultural, that will come off. And have an agricultural exemption in a neighborhood where we're putting up new properties, right? So in this particular one right here, number 9, says should have something after the prior year to be issued a property, so agrees to indemnify the title company, right, and my underwriter. And it says that the seller will make the whole. Okay. Yes, sir.
So on that closing. The new buyer is gonna get exempt from 3 years back, rollback taxes. Right?
3 year,
3 or 7.
so what's gonna happen is that agricultural is gonna come off. There will be a cap for that. All right, and then yes, the taxing entity, the county is gonna want to get paid for those rollback taxes.
That's paid by the party that changed it, and that's not the buyer or the seller, that's the builder or the developers. It shouldn't be the buyers, unless the buyer is the developer.
That seller is the builder. Right, absolutely. So they're gonna get hit with a bunch of those.
Seller.
Yes, absolutely. And what they really should have done, as soon as they started developing, they should have went and pulled that agricultural exemption off already. But
That's negotiated in the contract. If the seller is selling it at the improved property without the exemptions, without the agricultural, and he's selling it at a higher price, so that's negotiated in the contract. If he's selling it at an agricultural price, and the buyer is getting the property at a lower price, and the buyer's gonna have to pay the difference after the fact, because it's gonna come up after the fact. Because the tax jurisdiction, after the closing on the property, and later they'll get the bill. They won't get it at closing. So you're right, it's who changes the use, but in this case, where use has already been changed as you're going through the process, then we're presuming it's negotiated in the contract, and the seller got the extra money, the sales price, to cover the fact that he's got rollback tax on his change of use.
that's absolutely right.
So he's done that.
That's absolutely right.
Would the buyer know any of this when he signed this offer? Contract?
Probably not. But when you sit down and I talk to them about the fact that the taxes are based on raw land, right, I get it. I mean, there's 3 houses in the neighborhood right now. I mean, it's just a gigantic field still. So, and everybody that's going through new construction goes through this up front, right? All those new big neighborhoods are dealing with prosper. There used to be vacant land. So we're having to go through, we're having to look at taxes and what they're based on with the exemption of book bank. Yes, Kate.
Okay, now I fell in the weeds. Okay. So I thought their taxes went up. Like the first, when they buy a new build, it's undeveloped property. I mean, there's not a house on it. Let's say they picked a lot.
Yes.
Okay, they had a house built on that lot. But their taxes are gonna be lower initially because, isn't that right? Because the taxes are computed on vacant lot, not on a structure on the house.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me go back to these steps.
Then the taxes go up the next year because there's a house on the lot. So it's developed property. But is it only for that lot, or are you saying they have to pay for the whole subdivision, even where the builder hadn't built anything? It has nothing to do with them.
Well, the one I just did, tax cert came out and said it was for 50 acres.
I know, I heard you.
So that means that they're still in the process of getting that all rezoned, or they probably already done it. It's just not effective as of 2020.
Unfair.
Well, it's not fair, but it happens. What I want you to see here is this section right here. You have the 3 stages of taxing. You have unimproved, partially improved, which is broken from a big open field into individual lots, right? Taxes automatically go up whenever you start breaking into a neighborhood. And you have fully improved once you have a structure on a particular property. So the closing I had today was partially improved because that's what the taxes we had. The seller in this particular transaction asked us to go through and prorate the taxes on the proposed tax value The proposed tax value that we had was showing $7,000 on a $700,000 property. Doesn't work, right? So what we're looking at is we're looking at a partially improved tax figure, right? So we had to indicate that on there, and then we had to have the seller's rep sign it and the buyer had to sign it as well, saying that your taxes are based on partially improved. They will go up when they get reassessed in 2023 again. They're going to be higher. The builder is aware of this as well. They sign this. And then when that comes off, where do we have our section here talking about supplemental taxes, right? Any rollback taxes that come out. And it's supposed to be up to the builder. In this particular situation, again, it could be negotiated otherwise prior. Needs to be able to make sure they're.
Was there financing?
Huh?
Was there financing?
There was financing, which is another very good point. A lender should catch this. Okay, so the one I just did, we had a sales price of $700,000. We had taxes that were based on $7,000. Prorations were based on taxes at $15,000. 2023. Okay, so a good lender is going to catch that to make sure that their clients are going to get what's big payment shock. As an agent, it's not your responsibility, but as a good fiduciary for your clients, you want to make sure that they're not going to get hit and get in big trouble next year. Right? Your taxes for a $700,000 property should not be $7,000. Right? So on this particular one, it was CJ across the street. The prorations were based on a $15,000 tax bill, which is about right.
Question on rollback. So it's 3-year rollback. That means, what I understand, I'm not sure. So that when the builder got it, it was like maybe the agriculture or something, just 3 years, they didn't pay the taxes. What happened? Why is it, and the new owner is getting all the taxes? What is that?
So I think I understand your question. Rollback taxes would essentially see that coming from like the scenario I'm talking about. The taxes were based on raw land and there's an agricultural exemption. They're going to go back now and they're going to have these properties subdivided. They're going to start building houses on it. They can go back and they can show that they started developing these properties last year. They can come in and say that this rollback, this agricultural exemption needs to be rolled back as to January 1 of 2022 or June 15th of 2022. There's going to be additional taxes that are going to be assessed because of the use of that land from that time period.
Builders were not paying those taxes.
But the builder means that the builder was not paying at that point in time. So what you're probably getting, we had an example like this when I went through a TDI class talking about the different exemptions and the endorsements. And she gave us a very good example of new construction. We had John Smith, he owned 300 acres out in West Texas. He decided that he wanted to start developing it himself. He financed it himself, put roads in, put a little gate up front, started selling 1 acre parcels, sold them all out. Got to the last 2 or 3 houses, and this particular title agent noticed that he still had an agricultural exemption on all that land. And he'd been selling houses off there for years. And he wanted, the lender for the particular buyer wanted an endorsement that protected them from rollback taxes. And she said, I'm not going to do that because that puts me on the hook. Because I can see that there are rollback taxes on here that are going to be assessed because it was never used for what it was intended for, the exemptions were intended for. Deal ended up blowing up. The buyer said they're going to walk away. They're not going to pay this extra. It was like $30,000 or $40,000 in back taxes that were going to come out. And finally, the seller said, I agree to go back and do that. But at that point in time, he had to go back in. He had to pay all the rollback taxes for all those lots going forward. So whenever that comes out, there's certain endorsements the lenders require. We're responsible for putting those on there in order to make the lender compliant with our underwriter. That puts us on the hook on some of those taxes. So we have to watch and make sure. So you will see that whenever we go through, if this is not zero, we will always make sure taxes are paid current at the time of closing. All right. Taxes have to be paid in full by the time we get through issuing that policy or running book for it. That's part of your policy saying that there's no claims to the property prior to your ownership. That makes sense. Here is a copy of it, just an example of a settlement statement. So we had those city and county taxes that I showed you that was on that proration agreement. This is just what it's going to look like whenever you come to closing right now. So this is pre-October 1st. Taxes are still not yet due and payable. So what we're showing is we're showing that taxes have not been paid by the seller yet. We're charging the seller for the time that they own the property up to closing. Taxes are then credited over to the buyer. The buyer via the lender, or whether they write a check themselves, they're responsible for making sure those taxes are paid in full at the end of the year. Okay, charge the seller for the time they own the property up to close, credit the buyer, buyer's responsible for the full bill at the end of the year. Because Texas is so goofy when we have those in arrears, right? I'll tell you something else that trips people up. If there's an HOA, there's always a proration for HOA as well. Taxes are paid in arrears, HOAs are paid up front, right? Which gets people messed up all the time. So when I'm going back and I'm figuring out an HOA proration for a seller, it's always from January 1 to the date of close. If I'm figuring a proration for HOA, it's from the date of close to the end of the year, right? Or unless there's, multiple payments throughout the year. But you have different taxing timeframes, which throws people off when they start trying to figure the prorations themselves. Let me show you one more thing here. You will always see this as well, R24. If we're closing before October 1, there's always an R24 tax endorsement. Stands for not yet due and payable. It protects that lender from any rollback taxes like I just talked to you about. Okay, they're always going to want that. It's a $5 endorsement for additional coverage. Here's another example of a tax certificate. We're showing 2022 tax year. Total taxes due $56.63.88. They're currently paid in full 2022. Flip over here to page 2, I'll show them. We always have 2 years. So if I don't have 2023 proposed out yet, you're gonna see 2021, you're gonna see 2022. I wanted you guys to see this one because this does have an over 65 and a homestead exemption again. All right. It shows the taxes without either one of those exemptions is $8,800. They're being taxed on $409,905. Whenever that comes off, it's going to be reappraised at $460,000. Excuse me, not reappraised, retaxed at the appraised value of that $460,000. Okay. You have your taxing entity, your tax collector, your millage rate, and how we got to that dollar figure for the taxes we're collecting right up here. It's the total of these items here.
Might have already said this when I was out, I'm getting more paperwork, but if the buyer does not immediately file their homestead exemption, do these old taxes, these old exemptions stay on the property?
No, well, that's up to the seller, right? Seller's gonna go and they're gonna transfer it off to the new particular homestead. What you run into is you run into a situation where the buyer can go in, say you buy the property, you can go in and you can file an application, you can make an effective date of closing. Right, and that'll automatically take over. If neither one of y'all do that, right, and the seller comes back 3 months later and says, hey, I bought a new house. I want the homestead exemption on this property effective the date I bought it. Then they're gonna go back and they're gonna increase those taxes back to the effective date of whenever the seller pulled that off.
Including the over 65.
Including the over 65 if they transfer to a new property, right? Where you get into trouble though, Bob and I were talking about this the other day. I talked to a fine young lady down at DCAD and I asked her,
She was being very nice because she was in a hurry because she had a lunch hour coming up.
she had lunch. So I specifically asked her, and I said, how does the process work for an over 65? This is one of Nick and Floyd's files. And she said, well, they fill out an application, they send it to us and they put the effective date and we transfer it off. I said, okay, so you're telling me if I go in there and I close on June 15th and I buy a new house and I put the effective date January 1 of 2022, then you will give me a homestead exemption as for that date. She said, absolutely. I said, so you're telling me if I didn't own that property for 6 months, but I put on there that I own it January 1, you're gonna give me exemption? She goes, yeah, that's what you told me to do. I said, so you're gonna allow me to commit tax fraud? And I questioned it at all. And the reason I tell you guys this is because when I sit down at closing and there's an over 65 exemption, there's a homestead exemption, I tell the sellers, you have to put the effective date of the transaction. Because if you go back and you make it retroactive to a prior date, that tax collector is going to want to get their money from somebody. Right. And that's when you get in a scenario, paragraph 8, where the buyer has to come back to the seller and say, I got all this extra money that's due. This is not fair. All right.
So when you say the date, are you saying the date of closing?
Date of closing. Yeah, absolutely. Should be the date of closing. Those exemptions should line up with the transaction dates.
So when you do the exemption or suppose somebody's selling and then when do you do the exemption? Like, where do you do that?
When to do it?
Yes.
So if I'm the buyer as soon as I get a copy of that recorded deed, which we, for most of the time in my office, we e-record. We have those out to you in a day or two. So really, the only thing that holds you back is getting an updated driver's license with your new address. And you can do those 9 times out of 10 online these days, right? So I tell clients they should be able to have that homestead exemption on there within a few weeks. And then you make that effective the date of closing. Because the deed has a date of closing on there as well. All right, another just example of my HOA prorations agreement. Says that we are agreeing to prorate tax between buyer and seller. Prorations are based on information we have from the prior year. We use this dollar figure, which was off the front page of that tax certificate. All right, 5663.88 were the taxes that were paid last year. We're going in and we're going to do a proration here. We're prorating as of 6/7. So that seller is being charged just shy of $2,500 for the time that they own their property after the date of closing. Crediting over to the buyers. Buyers are responsible for that full bill at the end of the year. We have my R24 not yet doing payable endorsement to protect that lender. And then just another example. So that's my statement I start with. The closing disclosure that comes from lender is going to be on page 3 as a credit to the buyer. Yes, sir.
At the end of the year, that's the seller, after he sold his house, see any notification as to what his taxes he's paid. Well, how does he do that?
How does the seller do that?
Well, no, how does the seller know what the taxes put on the higher,
They wouldn't know unless they were contacted by the buyer. Say that the taxes have gone up. Is that what you're saying?
No, he's talking about the taxes he paid for the first part of the year when he owned the property. He paid property taxes that he wants to use his federal taxes thing. He's credit for taxes he's paid.
Oh, well, you just have to show that closing disclosure to your
It'll be on the closing statement.
closing statement. Yeah, just showing. Absolutely.
Which is why tax fraud comes into play, as he was pointing out earlier. If he's able to get away with a tax jurisdiction put January 1st on it, and he closes June 15th, he's picking up that extra tax exemption. And then if he's, remember, whatever tax rule you use, if you're never audited, you're right. The IRS audits you, it's tax fraud.
You're in trouble. That's right. And they're not gonna let you have 2 exemptions on the same property, so that they make
You might be in the same cell as some other famous people we know about, so.
I pulled this directly off of a county website. I don't even remember which website it was off of right now. I feel like it was down south somewhere. They had a real good explanation. So I've saved this. A resident's homestead is protected from future assessed value increases in excess of 10% per year from the date of the last assessed value plus the value of any new improvements. The limitation takes effect the resident's homestead on January 1st of the tax year of the following the first year. The owner qualifies for the property for residential homestead exemption. All right, that's off the taxes or the Texas property tax code. Market value per the Texas property code, all taxable property must be valued at 100% of the market value as of January 1 of each year. The value is shown on your notice as total market value. Because it's based on recent sales, the total market value may change upwards or downwards in any amount depending upon the recent market trends and is not limited to increases of 10% or more. It may change as much as the current market change. That's your appraised value. The assessed value, which is also your homestead cap value. Per the Texas Property Code, an exemption for taxation is available to an individual's primary residence. One of the features of the exemption is the limit to the amount of the value for taxation and can increase from one year to the next. This limit is frequently referred to as the homestead cap. The assessed value is limited by the homestead exemption and may not go up more than 10% in 1 year in most cases, as long as the exemption was in place prior owner for the current year. This number is calculated using the previous year's assessed value and a cap of 10%. And they give an example of it, right? Does that make sense? So I hear people going back and forth all the time, talking about 10% increases. Some of them kind of know what they're talking about, some of them sound like they're a little bit confused. So now you guys all know, right? They can go up 10% if you have a homestead exemption. It's based on that property.
Now, what goes up 10%, market value or the assessed value?
Assessed value.
So that's a test question, so you need to make sure you
Write that down.
We have a 20-question test we're gonna hand out.
So that's important because you guys, it's about the time of year, everybody's starting to get they're gonna come out and start getting their notice of tax increased. And it's gonna have an appraised value and everybody loses their mind. The appraised value is not the same thing as the assessed value.
What's the cap on 65, on the homestead 65 and over?
It's different.
Different.
It's different for each transaction or for each property, I should say, excuse me. And I'll tell you what else, if you call the tax collector and ask them, they'll tell you have to talk to a tax assessor, I don't know. I've also tried to call the tax collector and say, can you tell me what these taxes will be when they pull that over 65 off or when they pull that homestead off? And they will tell you that I will believe it will be around this dollar figure, but they will not give you a good figure. Which is another reason why I will not use the 2023 proposed value unless you specifically ask me for it. I'm going to always default to the values from last year.
So what's the benefits? Homestead.
So it's over 65 will also cap your taxes, plus it gives you an additional discount on top of the homestead. And it's different for each jurisdiction. Right? So if you're in Collin County and you have Frisco ISD is going to have a different over 65 exemption than Prosper ISD or McKinney ISD. And from what I understand is it's all different for each jurisdiction. And I've seen it, I don't know why, I don't know if it was an error or not, but I've seen where some of the jurisdictions will have an over 65 exemption and the others will not. So I don't really know how they figure that, and I haven't been able to get anybody to give me a clear.
I just heard that they were different, per county.
County, that's in Denton County, they're frozen.
School time.
I bought a house 6 years ago. I paid the same taxes I did when I bought the house. It does not go
Until you pull it up,
up until I sell.
then you start all over the new process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happened, Plano, I sold the house, they were equal value. As far as dollars go, when I sold and bought. But my taxes doubled. I went to Denton County.
Just froze it out.
And what it was frozen from a lower number here. And then once but when I sold, they were bought to sold at the same price.
What I don't understand, and you're 100% correct, what I don't understand though, in this particular situation I saw. And I don't remember the jurisdiction, but it was like Denton County. And then in Denton County, you have Prosper ISD, you have Little Elm, you have, and for some reason, this particular situation, the jurisdictions were different on whether or not they accept that.
They are, so once you get there.
Once you get there,
it froze.
Yeah,
I knew Denton County aren't frozen.
they're not
I
frozen.
don't like them.
Huh?
Did you apply for it?
I have over 65 homestead exemption. I have everything. Mine are not frozen.
And on that particular one I saw, the amount that they
It's the
were,
school district. Because you do, I still have to pay all the school taxes.
Yeah, you still have to pay them, they just, the school is like.
But mine are not frozen. I'm in the wrong way up. And I have 65 and I have homestead.
Tommy?
The road, what if you have an investment property, is there a cap on your assessment?
can have a homestead on investment property.
So the answer would be yes or no.
No.
Oh. See, that's another question on the test, 20-question test.
It wasn't a question test, it's going up.
Now, there's an important thing here on the difference of exemptions in different jurisdictions. When you've got a buyer and they're comparing their costs and they're looking, for example, the city of Richardson doesn't do some exemptions that the city of Plano does. And so you're going to have a different tax situation. And when they look at that and say, oh, man, when I look at this situation, it's the city taxes, school district taxes, all those come into play. So when your buyer is looking at the money it's going to cost him to own a property in this jurisdiction versus another one, that difference in the taxes can make a difference. So you need to have a sense of, which means you need to know in a particular city. I mean, because you don't just have a general across the board. I mean, city of Richardson, for example, will have homestead. ISD has, the ISD has some requirements under the state rules that the school districts have that counties don't have, for example. So you need to have a sense of that difference.
That's
James?
also why you need to be very knowledgeable of an area for floods and bids that may or may not be collected by the taxing authority.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
That brings up a good point. Do you mind if we
Please.
talk about that? So your mud, you notice the buyers that everybody's doing now, right? You're in a mud, you're making sure that your seller signs that notice to buyer and your buyer signs that notice to buyer. If that does not get signed, from my understanding, they can go to closing, sign up paperwork, take possession of the keys, and then find out they're in a mud. They can say, wait a minute, we don't want this property anymore.
Yeah, if the documents were not, if the documents were not presented at closing. Now, what happens is they're presented at closing, especially with builders, and it's in that stack of documents with initial here, three, it's just, and they don't have any idea. They don't know. But if the buyer signs off on it at closing, they've lost their ability to come back.
That's right.
But if the documents are there, now as an agent, you represent a buyer, you need to make sure those documents are there. Yeah, because they can terminate all the way until closing happens. They should have had this document on or before the effective date of the contract. That's when it should have been presented for months and kids both.
So are you saying the buyer who is not given that document, that form, but it gets signed at closing? They contract with the builder, they can terminate.
You can't terminate a contract that's closed.
No, I'm
What
saying,
they have is recourse. They have recourse against the builder for not giving them notice.
well, no, what I'm saying is, we enter into a contract that has a MUD, and we have, as agents, we have not provided that MUD disclosure. That gives the buyer the right to terminate up until closing if it's not presented, but if it's presented at closing, then they don't have the recourse of terminating.
If they sign off on it, if they accept it at closing. And when they finally get it, say, whoa, what's this? Oh, I'm not buying this house. And they could probably get out of the deal. But if it's not presented, but if it's presented and they accept it, then they've lost their leverage. And that's when most of the time it happens at closing. Would you see that?
Absolutely. Most of the time they say, well, we have no idea. But I will say that our agents in this office are very good about having that check addendum signed that shows, so people are at least given some
That's a
idea.
pit addendum. There's not a mud addendum, there's a pit addendum. So that's a track addendum that you would use.
The builders are quite upfront about it. We are, it's for the first, the pit and mud builders is quite, they declare it from the beginning.
Yeah, the builders are very good about it. They're very good about it. We had a scenario actually today where we had a mud addendum that we were stipped for on our title appointment. The underwriter wanted to see it. We went and pulled it online. We don't know how it happened. I think our tax certificate showed a different tax rate than the actual form, the mud form. So one of our girls, Don Neese, Sharp, called the attorney that was listed on the contact information for that bid, and she's, no, that form's outdated, it's no good anymore. This is a form that you guys have online, so just be careful, make sure that you guys are looking at those, making sure they're current. We will do our part to make sure that you guys are getting a good form of closing, but those really are supposed to be disclosed up front. Especially this pitted in the trick of them. What else do we have here? Did you already go through this, I guess?
No, I haven't gone through the contract. We're doing some other kinds of things. For example, go to 7H where we deal with the resident service contract, the home warranty. There you go, 7H, resident service contract, which is the home warranty. So if the seller puts something in there, say they put $500 in there, where the seller is saying to the buyer, we'll reimburse the buyer up to $500 if they purchase a home warranty. So it's just in the contract itself, right? Paragraph 7H. So if the buyer does not purchase one, they don't just get the 500. But we're having title companies who, the buyer says, well, where's my 500? It's in the contract, I get 500. So reimbursement, the language is very clear. It's a reimbursement. You had to buy it to get it.
It happens to us all the time.
Yeah.
Happens to us all the time. Where
Buyers expect the money.
we'll get to closing. We've asked the buyer 10 times for them to choose a company for home warranty. Can't get them to respond back. Can't get the agent to respond back. And they'll say, well, just give them a credit for $500. We can't just give you a credit. It's got to be for the purchase of a home warranty.
Now, do you contact the home warranty company? What's the process of closing and dealing with that?
So we will give them a couple of different examples of companies they can contact. We usually give them 3 companies. We'll give them, I think, Super, we'll give them Fidelity and one more. I'm not honestly sure, but we'll give them 3 different companies to go through and look and find a home warranty they want. They tell us which one we want, and then we will order it for them. We will collect the invoice and we will pay that flow and closing. And we will pay up to the dollar figure that's indicated here. So if they have $500 to use towards a home warranty and it's $600, charge the seller $500 and we'll charge the buyer $100. Right? And vice versa, if they have $500 to use and they pick a home warranty for $450, they're going to get a credit for $450. They're not going to get an additional $50 credit anywhere. It's up to that dollar figure. Does that sound? Yeah, we haven't talked about this. Does that sound good to you?
That is good. And, you know, if you're an owner agent selling your own property, home warranty has to be in the transaction. Our E&O requires it. For you to have errors, omissions, insurance coverage, as an owner agent, that has to be in the transaction.
What's your dollar amount required?
There's not a dollar amount requirement. It has to be home warranty in the transaction.
Who pays for it?
Well, it doesn't, the E&O doesn't care who pays for it. It's just that it has to be provided to a buyer. Buyer can pay for it. Where you get into a challenge is if the seller says, well, yeah, I'm happy to do it, and the buyer doesn't, and there's not one in there. We actually are going through Travelers, who's our E&O for both here and Rockwall, and getting them to put a rider and a language in there that allows us, because what we've been doing is we put a dollar amount in there, and whether the buyer chooses to do it or not, we figure, well, we've offered it up, not our problem. But the E&O came back and said, no, it's got to be one in here, or we have to have something, and had to do this in the rider. But they said you have to have something in writing from buyer where they waived purchasing a home warranty. Otherwise, we violated that particular coverage requirement, which requires self-disclosure notice, requires inspection, requires using a track form. So that's if you're an owner agent. Yes, sir.
We have a situation where the owner agent, you offer them home warranty, and they come back with a counter because it's multiple offers and say, we'll pay home warranty, we'll pay whatever.
Buy it.
Well, it's the key. If the buyer is going to buy a home warranty and the transaction, there is a home warranty for the buyer.
Right.
You know, says, we don't care who pays for it, we just care that it's there, that it's happening as you work through that. So that's, you know, that's going to be an important part here. And that's just, and that's it for an owner agent transaction where you're selling your own property that you own. Because we just are going through this with one of our agents dealing with it. We had an agent in Rockwall who didn't know this at all, and she sold her own property. And we ended up in demand a threat for a lawsuit. Didn't end up a lawsuit yet, for a threat. And we turned it into our E&O. And because our agent seller did not offer a home warranty, she has no coverage in the E&O. Any suit or anything is straight out of her pocket. So it's a pretty important provision to have in there. I should work through that. So that's, yeah, so that's an important part of in there
That's what in the entire E&O
for that agent.
for that agent.
Now, if we get sued, we're okay, but the agent has no coverage.
So even if.
But because most E&O insurance policies, unless you set up a rider, you have no owner agent coverage. If you own the property as an agent, an insured in the E&O, and you sell your own property, unless you do some specific provisions, you have no errors and omissions insurance because you're too much in control of everything. You know, said, well, and for a long time, you couldn't get it. You couldn't get owner agent coverage at all. And now that we've always been able to negotiate a rider in there, we meet certain requirements, we get to have it. You work through that. But that's kind of a little bit of a challenge. Yeah. But it, you know, we had to go through a couple of experiences. Hey, we've got to negotiate, and we were able to negotiate with the E&O company to get a provision on there because what they had originally wanted to do says, okay, here's what we're going to require you, the seller, to do, the listing agent to do is you have to go ahead and choose a home warranty company and buy it for the buyer. I said, no, we will not do that. We will not choose and purchase a home warranty for the buyer because if anything goes wrong with that policy, we're liable. So we will not do that.
So
They've got to choose.
So for those of us in this office or in this meeting, Other offices may not offer this, this is unique to
This
your
is
office.
specific to what we've been able to negotiate with our company.
So
Not all of the all brokerages have this
Yeah.
because they haven't negotiated with their company.
So can you explain a little bit because which part of the contract is that like, I didn't get the.
7H talks about the home warranty, residential service contract. See important to that, right?
Yeah, okay.
And that's what talks about it. And what we're talking specifically about here is if you are an agent and you own a property and you're selling your property you own.
Yeah.
That's the specific that requires this under our
It's also for our clients. They just.
What
for
clients?
us.
The buyer?
Yeah, the buyer.
Okay, if you represent the buyer.
Yeah.
Okay, so our question kind of is, if you represent the buyer, should they get a home warranty? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I encourage you. In fact, it's a nice closing gift. I encourage you all. It could be an expensive one anyway. We're sure than those. But I encourage you to encourage your buyer to get a home warranty. Because anything you do that's above the minimum, it increases, and it mitigates the situation of them filing a complaint or a lawsuit or whatever like that. And if you're paying for it, and or we get the seller negotiating. If you've got seller, I would encourage the seller to pay for it as you go through the process or litigate with somebody. But if you do it and the buyer doesn't have a great experience with the home warranty company that they chose, to give them several, you say, you know what? It's free. Don't be fussing at me because it's free. It wasn't a blank check. It was a free. If you get anything out of this, you're ahead of the game. It's like I was at a meeting. I was in an open house kind of thing. And there was lunch. And I knew I was in the middle of a group of realtors because they were complaining about the food. I said, it's free. They provide you with free food and you're fussing about it. Come on, work with me, realtors.
So what number should I put on? What is
Oh,
it?
that's negotiated. Seller gets to decide. If you've got the buyer needs to look at some home warranty companies, decide which one they like and see how much the coverage is. And for example, if you're a nice big luxury house, like some people deal with like that, maybe $1,600. If it's a normal one, it may be $500. The common number I see is about $500. But what you've got to do is let the buyer decide how they decide. You can provide brochures. They call some marketing people up and find one that they like. Say, yeah, I like that one. Whatever the numbers are for the basic and maybe the basic plus, then that's the number they can negotiate.
That maybe depend upon the pool.
Sure, it's all that other good stuff. You got multiple ACs. And there's a sense of, if you're in a multiple offer situation, the buyer is not typically going to ask the seller to pay for it. But the buyer ought to keep that within the price that they're going to pay, whatever, and be able to negotiate that and say to the seller, you know what, we're paying you $1,000 more than what you should get. We're doing that because here's what we want. We want a home warranty. So you should be able to negotiate that transaction. That makes semi-sense.
It doesn't say who's paying, right?
Pardon me?
Who's
It
paying?
says the seller is reimbursing the buyer to reimbursement.
Okay.
Buyer purchased one, seller reimburses. But only if the buyer doesn't purchase, they don't get it. Notice where it says reimbursement, seller reimburses.
Okay.
So that's the deal there. You want to talk about this title company that you loosely associated with? I noticed, does everybody get a little brochure, a little thing there?
Yes, yes.
Because I really appreciate him being able to take time from all the stuff he's doing because he's growing great. What, you in your 4th month now?
5th month.
5th month, and they're doing great. I mean, to have a title company in their 5th month do what they're doing is incredible. Of course, a large part of it, like closing that you just have, working over here with one of our agents, one of our top agents. And we're going to encourage you to walk across the hall or across the parking lot and see those fine folks over there. They're on that south end of the building across.
Security, though, it was legacy title and now it's trust.
Yeah.
I wanted to show this to you guys because on the back here at the top, there's a link to our closing cost calculator.
Oh.
So you guys need to make sure you get that so you can go in and you can tell them, this is what your taxes are gonna be at closing, so on and so forth. And then my contact information there, right there at the very bottom.
Perfect. Anything else you want to do? I have some more things in contract that are not title related. So you're free to go if
Okay.
you're done.
I'm very good. I hear.
Okay, sir.
You bet, you bet.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Hold on, hold on. That's along.
I'll return it to Tommy because I know that's a valuable asset of his.
Are you back at the good one or what? Are you just here to get team?
He's back from Florida. He said he can only stand so much beach and sunshine. But you know, it's been good for you. You must have swum a lot. You're looking good. Really slim down a little bit. Okay, get the contract out, the 1-to-4 family contract. I do want to touch on a couple things in here. We're almost out of time, but there's some things that we still have an issue with. We beat to death the whole earnest money and title insurance, option B and all that. So everybody knows we take it to title company, except when the buyer is going to extend the option. So they're gonna try to extend that option period for another 5 days and they pay $10. That's paid to the seller, not the title company. And that's what it says on the amendment form. And the reason for that is title company says, this is normally a small amount. We don't want to mess, don't bring it to us. We don't want it. So that's why we're taking it to the seller. As you work through it. The other thing in paragraph, on this second page of the contract, in paragraph 6A, 6A8, we still want to make sure that everybody understands the choice the buyer has here to amend this exception. Number 8 is the survey, and the title company is saying to the buyer, if you've got a problem with mistakes on the survey, don't call us, it's an exception. These 9 items here, when you look at your title insurance policy, these are standard printed exceptions. And the title company is saying to the buyer, you have no coverage for any of these 9 items. However, you can pay us a fee and you can have coverage if you've got a problem with the survey, except for 1 item, and that's shortages in area. But encroachment, overlapping protrusions, boundary conflicts, any of those, if you've amended this exception, paid us some money, it shows up as a line item on the settlement statement. If you've done that and you've got a problem with the boundaries or an encroachment of the next door neighbor or something like that, mistake on the survey, you can file a claim with us. New or existing survey, either way. But the shortages in area, which is the exact square footage of the land, no coverage. You cannot, they will not waive that out. They will for the lender, but they don't for the owner's policy. So if that's the case, if your problem is you thought you had a certain, like you thought you bought an acre, it turns out not to be an acre. And it's mistaken in survey, and you say, well, I want to file a claim. Well, not with the title company. Your only place you could go is if it's a new survey made for you, you can go to the surveyor. But if it's an existing survey, you have nowhere to go for shortage scenario. Because that, when you look at your title policy, understanding for exceptions, number 8 will say shortage scenario. That'll still be an exclusion, still be an exception. So you need to understand that. And my feeling is, one, I should always get a new survey. You should always do a new survey. And even on a new survey, you should go ahead and do this. Because what happens is survey shops go out of business. Sometimes it's a small mom and pop shop and they go out of business or retire, move to Aruba, whatever. So if you've got the deep pocket, the title company behind the problem, you've got somewhere you can go. You didn't necessarily work, but at least you could file a claim. That you work through it. Now, so to the third page here, paragraph 6C, this relates to the survey. I really think if you can at all negotiate 6C2 or 6C3. If the buyer has a strong negotiating position, they can say to the seller, I want you to pay for a new survey, and that's 6C3. If the buyer says, well, I want to make this a really attractive offer, I'll pay for the survey, that's 6C2. If the buyer accepts an existing survey against your best interest, best advice, that's 6C1. And you have a number of days in there, which is a fairly short period of time, maybe 3 days, maybe 5 days. And that's the amount of time the seller has to provide the existing survey and the T47, which is a notarized affidavit. You've got 2 boxes in 6C1. And the purpose of these 2 boxes is if the title company or the lender don't approve the existing survey, they don't find it acceptable, then whoever has their box checked pays for a new survey. It's not the buyer who gets to object to the survey. It's the title company or the lender. So you have to be careful because you'll have buyers who, well, I don't like that existing survey. It's not clear. It's not what I thought it was going to be. I don't want it. I want a new survey. And I want somebody, that's not what it is. It's not the buyer who gets to decide that it's not acceptable. It's the title company or the lender. And frankly, the lender doesn't care as long as the title company accepts it. Title company accepts it, then we're good as you go through the process. But what we have are title companies who on a semi-regular basis will ignore these two boxes. And the buyer said, well, that's not acceptable survey and I want a new one. And they'll automatically charge to a seller. So, yes, ma'am,
Can they split the costs?
they can.
Where,
Yeah,
what would they
and you
check?
do that in paragraph 11, special provisions, where you could say buyer and seller agree to share equally in the cost of a new survey.
Check both boxes then.
You could, but if you check both boxes, if you check both boxes,
Right here.
if you check both 6C2 and 6C3, you want to clarify that in paragraph 11, special provision. That's a business detail. Yeah, you could, if they want to share it, that's a good strategy, and you could certainly do this. So if you want to check 60, don't check 61, 62, 63. If you do one, that's existing. You're going to do a new survey, 62 or 63. As you go through that. The other challenge we have is in 6D objections. Those 9 items, 6A1 through 7, 6A1 through 9. The buyer cannot object to any of those items unless they put something in the big blank in 6D. And the big blank in 6D, the buyer says, we want to build a big in-ground pool in the backyard. And then when they get survey, they find all these easements in the way that they can't build a pool. Well, if they put that in the big blank, they now have a basis for objection. If they don't put that in the big blank, when they see those easements, well, we object to that. You don't get to object. That's already something that's excluded. You don't have a right to object to easements because that's already in 6A1 and 6A 1 through 9. So if your buyer is something they want to do with the property other than residential use, don't put that in there unless it's really a question. Then put that in the big blank in 6D and create your basis. Now, whether you have something in the big blank or not, always have a number of days in the small blank. It could be small, it could be 2 days, 3 days, 5, something like that. But always have a number of days there, because if you don't have a number of days there, automatically have a dispute. Always make sure you do that. And remember, whatever the buyer puts in here, it needs to be important because it clouds the offer. The seller may be saying, oh, that's a weasel clause. That's just a way for you to get out of the deal as you work through it. So when the buyer goes through the process, he needs to make sure he understands if he's got something in there that he wants to create a basis for objection. It's the buyer's responsibility to determine if he can do it or not the seller's. The seller has no responsibility, zero responsibility in 6D to do anything with a buyer's objection. You look at the language and you see what the seller can do here. It says, as you go through the process, by right to object, except that requirements to get received midnight way by provided seller is not obligated to incur any expense. So, I could send a letter to the county and it fix this problem, but I'd have to go down to the post office, I'd buy some stamps, and stamps have got really expensive now. And then the gas to get to the post office, I'm not gonna do that, but, and they don't have to do literally anything. And so if buyer objects, it's up to the buyer to determine whether you can do this or not, how important it is. And the buyer's got a timeline in there. Seller's got 15 days to decide if you're gonna do something or not. And then the buyer has a timeline after that. And if he doesn't, go ahead and either move forward, say, well, you can't fix it, and I object, I'm gonna terminate the contract and my earnest money back. Or if he doesn't do anything, he's automatically accepted the property in spite of the objection. Because it may be that he wanted to do that if he could, but he likes the neighborhood, he likes the house, he wants to buy it anyway. And he gets to do that. So you really need to make sure it's not a casual situation. We have one in Rockwall, we have one here, where we had the situation where the buyer misunderstood their rights under the objection. They thought the seller had rights. And we had an investor who ended up buying a property he couldn't rent out. He thought the seller essentially said, oh yeah, you can rent it out, not a problem. And it was really, was a bad thing on the agent's part, is agent said, well, I'm sure you can rent it out, it's not a problem, because it's currently being rented. It's currently has a tenant in it, so surely it's not a problem. Well, the problem was that the HOA had changed the percentage of non-owner occupied properties. And now this would make it exceed, and so they couldn't do it. And I had to own the property for 1 year before you could rent it out. And that was a problem.
So if I rent down able to rent out,
Do what?
if I rent down able to rent out this. might
Then
be a
that means the
problem.
buyer has to talk to the HOA and find out if there's a problem. Buyer has to do it. The buyer, putting something in here doesn't fix the problem. It just gives the buyer a right to object.
Okay.
It gives the buyer a right to object, and if the problem isn't fixed, then the buyer terminates contract. Now, remember, what we're talking about in mandatory HOA, which is a whole separate addendum, but if the buyer says, well, I want to be able to use it as a rental property, and I can't do it for that. The buyer, as he goes through the process, he says, and so, well, I need to look at the title at the HOA docs to determine if I can do that or not. You do not get to review the HOA docs and determine what it allows your buyer to do. It's not a Shrek document. You can't review it. You cannot interpret it. You cannot give them a report on it. You just practice law when you did it. So you better have a law license. Cannot do it.
Or you just hand it over to them and tell them.
Give it to them and say you need to review it. Any question, you call the HOA or have an attorney review it for you. This is one of the two I just talked about. 65 pages of HOA docs. 65 pages. And it's the very first page, it looked like it was allowed until you got to the 35th page. And then what?
That was an amendment or something that you didn't see until later on, you read, because
You got it right up front. You had the HOA docs very quickly, you know, within 10 days of the deal, had HOA docs. And our agent read it, shouldn't have, and buyer read it. And of course, in that case, the buyer took some response and said, you know, I really missed that. I really should have seen that. And so the buyer accepted half of the cost of that ownership for a year. James?
that is as simple as a phone call.
Oh, could be, yeah.
That's the HOA.
They'll talk to you, you're right.
Why they couldn't rent it for a year if they.
They had to own the property for 1 year before they could rent it out.
But how did that change the percentages that were rented in that neighborhood?
Well, because the board of directors for the HOA had changed the numbers,
Right,
and the seller had been given that and did not disclose that to the buyer. And the buyer didn't know that the ownership of this property moved them beyond, they were at 35%, it dropped to 30%, and said, no longer can have any more rental properties. And so he,
how did the year change that? Change
well,
that?
it could have said in there that you couldn't be beyond this unless you've owned it for a year, then after you own it for a year, you can now rent it out. And that's fairly common, by the way. It's fairly common HOAs that you have a certain period of ownership that you have before you can rent it out. That's fairly common. James?
That was a grandfather type situation, seller failed as well.
Well, kind of. Yeah, but good luck on that.
Yeah.
Good luck, you know, pushing those buttons and going after that, so.
But what happens like if suppose investor wants to buy it, and there's a 7-day maybe option period. But the HO, they didn't get the HOA form, papers on 10 days. So when can he?
When the buyer gets the HOA docs, he has 3 days after receiving it
Prices to say no.
to terminate for any reason,
Okay.
any reason. Once he gets those docs, he's got 3 days to review them or ask questions of the HOA and go through the process. So in addition to the option period, maybe self-disclosure, any other rights termination, he's got that 3 days after receiving the HOA docs.
And another thing is for the builder, if the buyers want to buy it and the builder doesn't have the total, final HOA, like, how can I do that? Was a situation like that.
If he has what?
Like builders,
Sometimes builders have subdivisions haven't converted to the property owners the HOA yet. The
Yes,
buyer's got to understand the risk, and there are two risks. One, we don't know what the rules are going to be. Second, we don't know the cost. Because right now, the builder is projecting costs for the HOA. And that could change 2 or 3 or 4 or 5-fold. I mean, it could go from $1,000 to $10,000 overnight. So the buyer needs to understand the risk. Well, yeah, but I want to get it on the ground floor. This new subdivision is great and this is the place. Everybody wants to be here. So yeah, I'm willing to take the risk. The other little risk when you're buying one of the first houses in a new subdivision. Guess who gets up really early is out there, wham, wham. It's just all, you know, all those workers out there and all the garbage and the dust and everything. They're building a house right next door to you, you got trash all over. I mean, there are some practical realities of being some of the first ones in that subdivision that you've got to be willing to accept. And this may be the exact right house for your buyer, so don't go overboard on this and get them all paranoid about, oh man, you don't want to buy that, so. But also, the lady who was working our agent said, I gotta have a new house. I want to be in a new home. I don't want an existing home. I want to be in a new home because I want to be in a home where nobody else has used that commode. Nobody else has used that backup. I hope that when it's under construction, she doesn't go out to the house and see what the workers are putting that in the tub. I mean, it's just.
Or in the wall, so you leave all their drain steps and they.
Guys, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well.
Max. Now you came in here and learned something. Learn something.
Yeah, so.
And the music.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, loud music.
Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully you didn't find out who played.
Well, I'll just.
Yeah.
These days. Back here. Then that's. Yeah, maybe the sun's.
Yeah.
It's everybody says. That's what it looks like. And I don't know. That's the reason. Why being like. That's what you get. So I'm gonna stop like up there. I figure out the big.
Oh, yeah.
I think you said.
But she's supposed to send it to the property owner and get them signed off. Yeah, I talked to Janet. Janet. I need to talk to she completes it. He went to court.
Yeah.
And the judge says, how do you plead? He said, not guilty. And so then, let's see what they did. If they release him on
Trials.
And we're going for it. Yeah. It shouldn't be a significant.
It'll be circus, it'll be circus.
It will be, except this time, they've got them for a serious agenda. They've got a bunch of stuff in it. And my real angst about the whole thing is, why didn't they do that with health?
Page 13. Sorry, okay, so nothing. Yeah.
So a 37.
Shouldn't be 23,000 emails.
And so
And they did nothing.
is please. And then,
His attorney, 2 days ago, so I don't know, he's not now, he's got one still in there.
he was released in his own recognizance. So no monetary bond,
Right.
which would be kind of silly.
Well, yeah.
You was $1,000. Let me get my change out of my pocket.
So if they use some service, just reinvent it.
I know.
He's a.
But I will tell you.
I have it right next quarter, so. That's like.
And he would have been fine. He's never been on Twitter. Crazy, and he should be on Twitter.
He was not very smart.
Now. Chris Creepy, all those guys. Are you not answer it? That's what he didn't do.
Yeah, well, that's all politics. That's all funny games. That's all circus. We keep right on doing what we do. Thank you, James. Appreciate you being here.
Always learn more when I leave than I did before I arrived. So thank you.
In a meeting. For 2 hours.
Another great class, Bob.
Thank you, Adam, for being here. I appreciate it.
There's nothing. to do.
Thank you for being here. So Jana,
What?
y'all need to make sure you get a termination of at least listing agreement back so we can terminate that in MLS. You need to send that to her and have her sign it.
I sent the email
Yeah, but
to.
you now see you send the termination form.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
So she signed off on it so we can terminate in MLS.
Bob, she's calling me, what, like, I don't want to talk to her. Can you talk to her?
Send her a text. I don't want to talk to her. Hey, let your coach talk to her. So send her a text and say, you know, I will be sending you a termination form.
You don't want me to talk to her.
You know what? For this one, I might.
Well, you have to back me up to Jill then, if you want me to talk to her. Oh, my God.
Sir, that you'll be sending her a termination.
Sorry, I said, I'm coming away with some, him up here with the sword.
But it is.
Austin with the sword. He's already posted the picture of it. Jill did. The one that came to be a Plano Paris.
Wow.
She emailed me and Bob. That was good. He said, I'm fine with it as long as nobody records this. Huh? Remember him saying that? There it already is.
Yeah.
In our post.
You're safe.
Yeah.
And I need to read that to Tommy.
To Tommy.
Yeah.
So, Jenna, I will discuss with Bob and I will see if I call her. This, Bob, you know, my stuff that's.
Right?
Well, except for using the old contract. Wherever that form is now, you can.
Do that.
Yeah, it was on the DocuSign. I don't know how it
No,
got
it
that.
was in a template. DocuSign doesn't have.
I think she wants to know what
It's in a
to do.
template
That's what she's.
from this buyer or previous buyer.
And
Make sure
now
it's
that I'm in
gone.
the landlord.
She'll find out.
And you guys have to make sure you understand.
Wants you to also do
Flag,
Oh,
whatever.
Yeah, it was already, we've already gotten a new contract signed on the current form and then put amendments that
She'll be so
it said
Okay.
the old dated contract is replaced by the new dated contract, all terms and conditions are the same.
Great.
I fixed it at least.
Good, well, gotta do it. Sometimes you just gotta do it.
That makes sense, yeah.
And they said, well.
Thank you, Bob.
Feels never.
Thank you, thank all of you for being here.
You been there.
Guess what? We got the lights.
I know, I have a, so I still have I still have a six.
But in the end,
I got
the
you.
system won't let me
I got you.
collect more than 3,000.
Yes,
It'll make me write church.
I know, understand, thank you. Yes, 1 month, I already finished all the cap, okay. Good.
Good job. Way to go. Good job.
But the Bob, if the home warranty, so like an agent, buyer agent, can I buy the home warranty like a gift for?
For your buyer,
For
sure,
my buyer.
absolutely.
Yeah, because no one want to,
Just make sure that it's documented so the home warranty is in that transaction.
no, in the, when I transfer from ESP and then my mentor, they totally teach us the wrong things. They write it down for that and then they say, you just write it down. Or you just mentioned about that part, he just told me, they just teach us, they write like that. So just write it. Now,
No. See, and it.
But this house is
What
closing.
you gotta do is, it's already closed. Okay, when did it close?
that's fine.
Okay, are you gonna buy a home warranty?
Yeah.
Okay,
I will pay for it.
so when you pay for it, make sure your buyer responds to you, that they have it, so that we have documentation that you had a home warranty in this transaction.
Oh,
So we need the buyer, who in fact has owned up to the fact that you bought it, or, accepted that you bought it. So that the buyer now the buyer gets to choose who it's gonna be, right?
mhm.
Which home warranty company.
They didn't choose.
That you do not choose. You never choose.
Okay, good.
Why do you never choose?
Responsibility.
Yeah, because if they have a bad experience, it's gonna come back on you. So just send an email to them, letting them know, says, I'll pay up to $500 or whatever your number is. And you need to go ahead and as a gift to you for a home warranty. And here's the different ones and choose
Let them
one.
choose one.
Yeah. And then make sure you have that documentation so you have a home warranty.
Okay.
Now,
Big-
is this a property you own? You just represent the seller,
I
you represent the
represent
buyer.
the buyer.
Okay, so it's not an owner agent property because you would never represent the buyer on property. So, Yeah.
So I just buy the like a
but
gift.
still just have that documentation. Yeah, if you want to do that, just make sure they appreciate the fact that you're doing something really nice for them. I mean, whatever, are you thinking about 500 or something like that? What are you thinking about?
I think it doesn't matter because this house, I think
What size is the house? How big
Um,
is it?
is a 26,000,
2,600?
Yes.
Okay. So $500 is probably.
They have
more
a swimming
expensive.
pool.
Okay, a little bit more. So as you give them the information on different warranty companies
Mhm.
and they pick one, say, okay, pick one and pick which plan do you want?
Mhm.
And I'll
But they
pick
are in the, for me, in the Sweden, we are kind of a little difficult because some of our buyer, they are overseas in the Taiwan, they even cannot read the English. They always say, hey, you decide. We don't know.
but you don't decide. You have to send it to them.
Mhm.
And didn't you have a translation document?
I let them do the translation website and then take a photo, translate to Chinese. over. Yeah,
So in this case, you still have to send them three email. They need to find somebody over there who does speak English
okay.
or does read English, and they need to pick one. And then say
Mhm.
whichever one you choose, I'll go ahead and pay for that.
I let them write this kind of email for me. It's okay. It's have any,
And what is this? What is this for?
this is for me, say they
To
are.
do what?
Just like, the liability, because
I
they,
mean, they give you full authority to do what? Full authority to do what?
to do this house order. All the, the assets or this side.
To do what?
This house, do authority for maybe open the door for them and then check that the house is okay and then like a
You mean do the
Washington,
walkthrough?
yes.
No.
But they already write a work to, they don't show in, they sign,
So have they seen the property? Okay. They see a video or something?
yes.
Okay. But
But they-
I don't know what that means, full authority.
They just want to ready
Full
them.
authority to do what?
So-
What is it they're expecting you to do?
nothing. He just think about give for me the permission and then I can wait for the legal, like any,
Because you're not signing the contract,
no, I know,
all right?
yes.
Okay, and you're giving them the names of inspectors who
Mhm.
need to have it inspected.
Mhm,
You're not choosing that.
mhm.
And then you're gonna provide to them. Now, it's a real challenge, and we've talked about this, and I've got to
Yes.
come up with some kind of a form
Right. I think
for foreign buyers who don't read English, and
yes,
who are totally relying on the agent. I'm gonna have to talk to a couple of attorneys and get them to help me with the process.
yeah, because
We gotta figure out.
we just
I'm really uncomfortable with that full party. That makes me nervous.
Oh.
I mean, because I think in their mind, they're trusting you to do everything.
so
They
they
are, aren't they? They're trusting you. to do everything.
any debit.
Yeah, I know.
They will not be liability.
Are these buyers with, pretty deep pockets? Have a lot of money? Are they?
Yes,
No, some foreign buyers are just ridiculously wealthy,
no, this kind of very,
but they're semi.
yeah, that's a really really good buyer. They understand everything. And then so next time we buyer already referral.
Okay.
It's your job now, you should use.
I know, I really back.
Ridiculous. Customer never see the
Make
product.
sure
Buy it.
while you're doing this, that they understand your limitations, what you can and cannot
I
do.
know,
I know it's hard. So, and they don't read English. Do they speak English?
so I'm scared.
Do they speak English? Okay. But you need to be able to work with them. You need to be able to do it, or they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah,
I mean, you'll lose them. And there are a lot of good foreign buyers out there, foreign investors.
Yes.
Who work with good agent because of relationship, they trust them.
right.
So
They
it's
trust me, so.
it's a real balancing act. As you.
I think still we need to have that kind of phone because you never
Yeah.
know.
You gotta-
Somebody were crazy like the lady. Today is
Yeah,
everything
the one
good.
that Shabina's working with.
Yes. You never know.
You
Sometimes
never know.
it's,
I mean, some
Little
people really
things
are
happen.
crazy.
so I think how it's a good thing you told to us. So we need to set out a boundary. I told them, say, oh, I can do this. I cannot do that.
But they need to understand why. They need to understand that you're just not wanting to do something because they need to feel good about you. They need to trust you
Yes.
to help through the process. They need to understand that the laws in Texas allows agents to only do certain things. And it's not just, best service to them. It's the law. It says it allows you to do things. And so you just need to understand that when you're doing something, you need to do some good rapport building about how this keeps your relationship going, because you want the relationship to continue.
Yes.
It's gonna be some great business for you.
Is it okay that we can, as agent, I can pay the earnings money for them?
Okay, now that's a big risk.
They wire the money for me.
Okay,
and
they
then-
send it to you.
And then they want to be
Okay,
paid for them.
Okay, that's right. If you get it first,
Oh, no,
but don't be paying it and hoping they'll pay you.
no, they wire 5,000 for me,
Okay.
my husband account, not my account.
Okay,
And then my husband help them pay for earnings money, like a friend,
and take it to the title company.
yes.
And they can send it to you. It doesn't matter.
Also,
Yeah, either way.
okay,
But what you're gonna do is you're gonna get it and they're sending you earnest money, which you're now giving it to the title company.
ask me, say, why a lot of foreigners, why are the money for you? Every month, say, well, like a 5,000, 10,000,
Yeah.
10,000 for
I think
you.
you're laundering money, huh? So you do need to be careful. If they're gonna wire funds to you or your husband, why don't they just wire it to the title company?
Exactly.
That's ridiculous. LGI, they don't allow for
Now,
the
who is LGI?
That's a builder.
builder.
That's not the title company.
But the earnings money go to the builder first.
It should go to the title company unless it's a deposit. And the builders are treated as a deposit. Either way, they will accept wired funds. They should accept wired funds.
Some of the
And you tell the
builders.
builder, says, I've got a buyer,
Uh-huh.
and the only way we're gonna buy your house is if you allow us to wire you the earnest money.
Mhm.
Because it's an out of country buyer.
Yeah, the other builder can do it, but I don't know the
Well,
LGI.
if they can't do it, don't buy their house. Tell your buyer, says, this is a red flag. If they're already that hard now, what else is gonna go wrong when they're building the house?
Mhm.
Not a good situation.
Oh,
So you need to say, here are the requirements. For my buyer to buy your house, they've got to be able to wire funds to you or the title company.
You know, LGI is so funny. They say, no, we have a lot of investor, the cash buyer, they already write a check and then in the sales desk. And then stand the line there with the contract and then everybody write a cashier check or check. Put for the sales agent when they have a sale
You
going
know how
on.
risky that
That's
is?
the deposit though.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't treat it as earnest money. They treat it as a deposit, which makes it really hard for the buyer to get it back.
Very different than earnest
Yeah.
money.
So that's a whole different issue. Earnest money goes to an escrow account, the title company.
Yeah, and then
Deposit
deposit.
goes into the builder's own account
Yes,
and it goes to Vegas.
yeah, right. I'm
And
talking
it may
about
not
the
be doing a
deposit.
really well craft table. And so you doesn't get it, it's finished your buyer's house. You buy, say, well, I want earnest money back. Oh, well, you don't have any earnest money, you have a deposit, and you already spent it. It's a risky thing. And I understand if it's a good deal for the builder, but you need to be very careful as you're helping them buy these types of homes.
Yes,
There's a lot of risk there.
okay,
So you need to be very careful. And you need to put some requirements on these builders. And I know if there are other buyers standing in line ready to buy those houses, that's hard. You feel like you don't have a negotiating position. But if your buyer's going to pay them some good money for a house, there's a lot of risk. Builder homes are number one riskiest transactions. And we're trusting them to do what they say they're going to do. And often they don't. And the smaller the builder, the bigger the problem. So you just understand the risk. So as you're helping your buyers buy these houses, now they're buying these houses and they're going to rent them out.
yes,
Okay, make sure that can be done. Make sure in that subdivision, because it's almost certainly a managed or homeowner association.
yes.
Okay, so make sure that they can rent them out. And it's not just putting something in the contract that makes it okay for them to rent it out. They've got to make sure with the HOA, they do it. And you cannot interpret those HOA rules. I know there's an English problem, but somehow they've got to find somebody over there, or they've got to talk to the HOA, something to find out what they can and cannot do. Cannot be you.
Okay, good to know. And then right now, I working with the other big project, the big development company from China, and then they come here buy the land. And then they have a subdivision they have a lot of project in Austin, Houston, and then Dallas area. From here right now,
What do they want you to do?
they want me to sell their house for the local people or the overseas people, and then they can guarantee 5% for the rental profit for the buyer.
Well, that's going to be between them and the buyer. So you're going to represent them in the sale of the real estate, sale of the house.
Yes,
You're not going to be involved in the development at all,
okay,
right?
yes, but they,
Are you saying you're gonna sell the homes that they're going to build
yes,
to the buyers?
to the buyer.
So you're representing a developer and builder at that point.
Are you representing the developer, or are you representing a builder on specific
Actually,
houses?
My side, right now, we're talking about so that their CEO will fly from Hong Kong. We will talk about this week. Because last week I'm so busy, so they will fly to this week. We will negotiate. For my side, I think I just a buyer agent. I told
So
them.
you
I
need
just
to look at who you represent,
Yeah,
and you will not be in a situation where you represent them and the buyer.
yeah.
Because these buyers are totally relying on you for advice.
Uh-huh,
If you also represent a seller, no advice. You move into an intermediary without appointments, not a good situation. So you're
okay,
gonna have to figure out a way that if they've got houses that they make available, like you're gonna represent the buyers to buy those houses, you're not representing the builder. They're representing themselves.
okay.
So when you meet with them, get some more information about the details of what they want you to do. Because what gets involved here is some of our liability and our errors and omissions insurance about what can be covered or not covered. We need to know all the pieces of the puzzle.
Okay.
It sounds like a good opportunity, but we need to know the details.
Yeah, so
you're
I
meeting them
need to-
next week.
This week, Friday.
Okay.
We will fly to here Friday, and then we will meet. We have a lunch meeting set up 2 hours to discuss.
Oh, yeah, where are you having lunch?
Right now, you want to go with me?
No, no.
Okay, I can bring with you.
I don't want to go.
Tell them where this is, though.
Yeah,
This is gonna be down in,
because they have right now this project is have a 144 house only sell for investor
Where is it?
in the Waxahachie.
Waxahachie, okay. So there are a lot of
And then only for me.
increasing the build or subdivisions.
let's get,
Yeah.
They only allow
like a
me.
rental neighborhood as opposed to. a rental house.
Yeah, so but they guarantee 5% for the all the investor. Even not rental or something, they guarantee for 5% 3 years. they.
Yeah, well, get that in writing so we can actually understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And what they want you to do.
Yeah.
What you're gonna be actually doing and representing.
Yeah.
And hopefully these people are gonna meet with speak English.
Oh, they're very, very, very good. And then those are very mastered. They know the number and PowerPoint, they do the
So
very.
how is it that they ended up talking to you?
Huh?
How did they talk to you? How was that connection?
Oh, it's my friend, they do some of the project together and then they introduce for me.
Tell I'm in trouble now.
Oh, yeah. Just kidding. I should talk to you first.
Okay, yeah.
Really, so keep us in the loop here. Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's my side.
It should be the termination of
Very
listing, right?
The name of our business.
Yeah, termination of listings.
It doesn't, I'm sure it should take me to the travel. Homepage.
And I don't know what your question was about.
Yeah, it's about, let's say, I buy the home insurance for the buyer. I buy the home insurance for the buyer.
This, what's the date today?
Today,
Yes.
today is 13.